we're going to be talking just a little bit. We've got a short time slot here for me to share just a little bit of information with you. And, you know, over these months and kind of recent years, you know, I've been spending, and we at SANS have been spending a lot of time talking to various students, various customers, various clients about what they're doing from a cloud security perspective. And certainly, as you know, many of the talks today, you've heard about different technologies, and one common theme and trend that we've seen is that, hey, everybody is at a different place in their journey to becoming a cloud security expert. For yourself as a security professional, right, you might be at a different spot on this journey along with where your organization, your enterprise is as well. And we like to think about this in terms of not just a journey to become a cloud security expert, but also this journey to become a cloud security ace, if you will. And to understand that journey, you know, what I want to do today is share with you just three things, three high-level things that kind of help illustrate, well, what is it that you as a security professional need to be, should be knowledgeable about in your journey to become this cloud ace. And then we'll go ahead and end this short session here with a little bit of an overview of the cloud security curriculum overall here at SANS. Excuse me. Now, as we've been talking to a lot of folks, as we've been looking at what's been going on in the industry, there are some clear trends that we've seen. And these trends, really, the top three, if you will, that we see down here are, well, number one is identity. I think we've all heard probably the phrase, identity is now the primary security perimeter in the cloud. And it's not so much that our traditional network security controls, security groups, network security groups, and so on have gone away. Those are still more important. It's just that identity now has kind of overtaken, if you will, or superseded or eclipsed some of the other traditional security controls that we might have considered first in our traditional on-premise world. And as we're thinking about identity, we also have to keep in mind that this is also different for the different cloud providers that are available out there. And with this increasing cloud usage, we do see this kind of trend that many organizations are using not just one cloud provider, they are using two or multiple cloud service providers as well. So how do you do this a little bit more effectively? Well, to do it a little bit more effectively, you got to have automation of your security best practices. So in the short time that we've got together today, I just want to try to highlight one item from each of these three different areas. And let's go ahead and start with identity here. And from an identity perspective, I think we all have a sense, we all know that across the major cloud providers that we've got listed here, AWS, Microsoft Azure, and of course GCP, that they've all got various identity and access management, IAM controls that allow you to define role-based access to your different cloud resources, to your different cloud services. At the very high level, these are all the same with some important nuanced differences underneath the hood, under the hood itself. Now, before I switch to the next slide, I believe that a lot of you guys are all in Slack. I'm going to be asking you a pop quiz here in Slack, in the Slack channel for this particular session, which is the Cloud 05 SANS Kim channel. So if you're not there already, please go ahead and get yourself in that channel here. Just go ahead and take a peek at it, because I'm going to ask you a pop quiz, and the first person that is quickest on the trigger to answer my little question here in a moment, right? Next time in a post-COVID world when we meet up in person, I owe you a beer, right? I will get you a drink next time we meet up. And so from an identity and access management perspective here, right? The one thing that I want to highlight is, hey, out of the box, all of the cloud providers have, well, default roles that we can use. This example here is the S3 storage read-only access managed policy. Now, what line number could potentially cause the issue here if we are using this AWS provided managed policy? Right, so I've seen a number of people chime in here, right? It looks like, wow, you guys are fast, just milliseconds after each other. It's just the basic network latency here. It looks like Gene was quickest on the trigger. Now we know when reviewing policies, you know, hey, anytime there's a star, that's something that, hey, it catches your eye, you want to pay a little bit more attention to. So this out-of-the-box policy is good because it only limits you to doing get and list operations. Now, while you might see this and say, hey, this get and list is bad, well, what makes it even worse is line number 10 here. Line number 10, resource star. Now, that means that anybody who has access, who is granted this role, has access to any S3 storage resource in your account. Not a good thing. This is exactly the type of issue, right, misconfiguration that allowed the Capital One breach to happen, for example. So why? Why does Amazon suggest that you use this managed policy? Well, it's because they don't know, right? They don't know what's the context that you might be using this policy in. So they need to make it broadly applicable to all of us, all of their different customers. So it's not that this is inherently bad, but what is better is that, hey, we suggest that you have your own policies that you create so that you can scope these resources down a lot more strictly as a best practice. And it looks like many of you chimed in, right? It's like, if I had promised the drinks to everybody, I would owe many of you beers, right? We'd have to get a few kegs, it looks like. But hey, there is another opportunity to get another drink of your choice, whether that's coffee or beer or a tequila, whatever it might be, here on this next slide. What's the line number that could potentially cause issues? And this is, of course, a built-in role definition for the Azure storage reader. And you can see here, lines 5 to 7, right? It lets you do things like list and read and so on, similar to what we saw before. And Dennis was the quickest on the trigger in this particular case, right? In terms of the response on the previous, I'm reading the wrong row here, but looks like Avinash, who I think came in second last time, was quickest on the trigger, right? It is line number 1, the assignable scopes that define, hey, what is the scope of this particular policy? So, hey, hopefully you guys enjoyed that as much as I did, and enjoying your virtual beer here, your virtual beer emojis. But hey, wanted to talk a little bit about identity, some of the basics, right, in terms of role-based access control, just to highlight, hey, what is it that we need to know about the details of how all of these cloud providers are working? And related to that, this brings us to the next concept here of multi-cloud. And for any good size organization, large organization, I see them using multiple technologies. To me, it's kind of like Windows and Linux. You don't go around asking, hey, are you a Windows shop or a Linux shop? Well, no, you've got both. And many large organizations, right, might be primarily in one cloud provider, but right, they also have other business units, other departments, other parts of the company that came in through perhaps acquisition that are using different cloud providers, right? And so looks like Fleetus is not a fan necessarily of multi-cloud, but what we're talking about here is that for us as security professionals to become that cloud ace, right, we need to be aware of, well, how do these different cloud providers actually work? And here on this next slide, we see from Flexera's 2020 State of Cloud Report, 2019 versus 2020, that public cloud adoption is increasing, right? We've got a lot of usage of AWS, a lot of increase in usage of Azure, and certainly, as we were saying, that different organizations, probably some of your organizations, are probably using multiple cloud providers as well. And so, well, what does that mean for us? Again, in the short time that we've got available here, I just want to take one example. And in this example, we just talked about IAM. So let's talk a little bit about storage, right? We saw a storage policy. So let's talk about storage itself, right? Whether that be S3, Azure Storage, or Google Cloud Storage. Now, from a storage perspective, if we just take one example, we've probably all heard those stories, those headlines of sensitive information being inadvertently leaked, inadvertently stolen, right, by publicly accessible S3 buckets and storage buckets. S3 and so on is kind of like now the anonymous FTP of the modern world, where we inadvertently leave some data out there for anybody to potentially get access, whether it be voter records, geospatial intelligence, other sensitive personally identifiable information, and so on. Right, and so thank you for pasting here into Slack a link, I think, which is related to what we are talking about here. So let's go ahead and take AWS as an example, and it's been known that this has been an issue for a long time. Now, the cool thing, though, is that AWS has instituted an additional control, account level control of S3 buckets to block all public access. By simply running a command like this, you can see that, hey, now all of the S3 buckets, unless you specifically configure a specific bucket to have public access, by default, all of the S3 buckets in your account, right, are going to have public access blocked like we see down here at the bottom. In my mind, this is a great addition, right? It's a small tweak, right? But it is a very important configuration that AWS has enabled. So what about the other cloud providers? Well, this is why, from a multi-cloud perspective, and hey, I'm not saying that, hey, we need to have a multi-cloud redundancy deploying the same workloads in different cloud providers yet. Some organizations are certainly going that route. But what we're talking about here is, hey, that journey to becoming a cloud ace, well, you've got to have an understanding of what are the differences, misconfigurations, the pros and cons of your different cloud providers. Now, in this first column, from a AWS perspective, right? Blocking public access, what we just saw on the prior slide at the account level itself. Now, certainly there are ways in Azure and GCP to block public access to buckets as well, but not at the account level, like we just saw with AWS. Access logging, if somebody is downloading a bunch of information from your buckets, that might be an anomalous activity. We need to look at our logs to see, make sure that that is actually happening. All three cloud providers provide a way to do that. Azure, we've got a little asterisk there, right? Just to point out that, hey, if you happen to be using Terraform, well, it doesn't have perfect Terraform support, great Terraform support for enabling that access logging via Terraform itself. And in the last column, default encryption, encryption of your data at rest. Well, you might be thinking, hey, AWS did a really good job on that account level access policy, but it turns out that they're the only one without default level encryption. Certainly, right, you can turn on encryption at rest in AWS, but it is not on by default. So just one example here to understand, well, yeah, why is it important? What do we need to know about these different cloud providers? All right, that brings us to the very last topic that we're going to be talking about today, right? Remember, I went, when in our short time together, they said, Frank, you've only got a short time to talk, so you've got to squeeze a lot of stuff in. I said, no problem. So let's talk a little bit about automation. Now, this is a broad term. We could be talking about a lot of different things here. We could be talking about DevOps, DevSecOps, the CI/CD pipeline. We could be talking about orchestration. And well, the point here is what we've talked about so far is that, well, what are the specific items of the cloud service providers, right? Identity, storage, configurations, and so on. And so, well, why are we moving to the cloud? We know that we're moving to the cloud because our organizations want to deploy features and functionality faster, more effectively, more efficiently, in a lot of cases, more securely. And it is automation that enables that. I, unfortunately, have been involved in a couple of lift and shift scenarios where organizations have taken their existing workloads on premises and simply lifted and shifted it and plopped it over into the cloud. But they didn't take into account the new ways of working to take advantage of all of the things that the cloud service providers offer to us. And so here, the one thing that I want to mention in this short section is, well, what are the technologies that help us enable this automation from a deployment, from a technology perspective? And that is really your slew of cloud native, quote unquote, related technologies. And the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, right, they help push forward the cloud native movement to enable public-private hybrid clouds, right, that multi-cloud that we were talking about, with technologies like containers, service meshes, microservices, infrastructure as code, and APIs as well. And so on their website, if you haven't been there, they also have, right, this somewhat overwhelming map, this cloud native landscape. Now they define in here, right, Kubernetes, of which they are the steward, other popular technologies, of course, like Docker, Envoy, Contour, Linkerd, and so on. And so this is a useful landscape. But for us, from a security perspective, and yeah, Phil, you are right. It definitely looks like you cannot even find Waldo here. I can't even see the Docker whale on this diagram, right? So there is a lot of stuff But fortunately, here on the next slide, well, what does it mean? For us as security professionals, I suggest that we start by thinking about the security specific items related to two of the most popular technologies, Docker and Kubernetes. Now we've got here the overview of the CIS benchmarks. CIS, of course, being the Center for Internet Security that publishes detailed technical benchmarks with specific security configurations. And here I just want to highlight in the Docker column, you've got things like the host config, the daemon config, container images, container runtime, security operations, and so on. On the Kubernetes side, you've got your control plane, controller manager, corresponding configuration, your kubelets, your policies. And this is just to point out that just like we talked a little bit about, well, how do the cloud service providers work in their services and their configurations, we also need to understand, well, how does Docker work? How do you deploy Kubernetes? How do you manage it? And therefore, how do you actually secure it? And so, well, what does that mean? Well, it means that we've got to be familiar with these trends, right? Identity, multi-cloud, automation, which is a big umbrella term here in terms of how do we enable that automation with those corresponding technologies. And thank you, Kenton. Oh, Kenton, nice to see you. Thank you for pasting the link to the interactive landscape map here in Slack for everybody. So for us as security professionals, maybe you've been doing cloud for some time. Maybe you're earlier on your journey. And so this is how at SANS, and some of this is actually, we are publicly mentioning some of these classes here for the first time, like the SEC 388 class on the far left-hand side, your foundational introduction, your baseline skills in terms of cloud security and computing. 488 here in the middle, your Cloud Security Essentials class that we got up and running this year, and various technical specific classes over here on the right-hand side, like the 510 class that is equal parts AWS, Azure, and GCP, like our 540 Cloud Security and DevOps Automation class, all about the DevSecOps pipeline. Brand new class here on monitoring and threat hunting, 541, to start in AWS. Of course, we've got the popular 545, Cloud Security Architecture and Operations, and other classes like 584 on defending cloud native infrastructure on containers, Kubernetes, and so on. And then we've got some other management classes down here at the bottom. You know, it's not just about understanding the technical items that we need to be familiar with, and certainly managers take these technical classes as well, but it's also about, well, what is your plan? What is your roadmap for rolling out your security-related capabilities in the cloud? How do you, in 516, build a vulnerability management program? And oh, by the way, not just how do you continuously deploy secure systems and software, how do you continuously automate, right, those checks as well, with 557 down here at the bottom. So here on the next slide is just more of a marketing version. And the reason I like this slide here is that for each of the classes, we've got a little tagline that tries to summarize, right, what this course is actually all about. So for example, 584 in the upper right-hand corner, hey, delivering securely at the speed of cloud native with these technologies, Docker, containers, Kubernetes, and so on. And a couple more slides here. And so the last main content slide that I will leave you with here is what we call our, well, we used to call it our job role map. Now, you know, hey, Laura came up with a great term. It's related to our Cloud ACE. This is your flight plan in terms of kind of how you might, where you might want to focus from your career in terms of the skills that you want to build out. Whether you're a DevOps, DevSecOps professional, whether you're a security analyst, engineer, architect, management role, and certainly depending on the size of your team, depending on the size of your organization, you might be wearing different hats, right? You might have to wear an architect hat sometimes, you might wear an analyst hat another day or within that same day, but you could see that we've got this flight plan laid out is what are those courses that are going to be most aligned with the different role that you might need to take that job that you might be performing or wanting to perform in your next endeavor. All right, everybody. So with that, right, that brings us to the end of my slides here. The items that we just talked about in terms of the courses, the curriculum roadmap is available on this link, sans.org/cloud security. On that page as well, we've got links to other blog posts, white papers, our YouTube page, other webcasts, and so on. So highly recommend checking that out. If you have any questions, any comments, feel free to reach out to me at any time. And I will be here on Slack chatting here with you guys for a little bit as well. So appreciate the feedback here. You guys always appreciate the feedback. It's this type of feedback in terms of which slides you liked and so on really helps inform how we, where we take the classes, where we take the curriculum. Also, right, what is resonating in terms of kind of the message, right, that we're hoping to share with you guys as well. So thank you all very much. Hopefully I will see you at the next, well, certainly virtual event, and maybe sometime in the future, see you in person at the next live in-person event at some point as well. All right, enjoy the rest of you guys' sessions, and yeah, hopefully hope to stay in touch, everyone.